Are you tapping your foot to this? Oh my goodness, what a great classic. What a fantastic contributor to humankind Count Basie and his orchestra was. April in Paris, I think a perfect lead-in to our next guest, who you have seen on television, on so many of the national shows. You've heard her on radio. One of the shows we carry right here on WBSM. Laura Morelli, the author of Made in Italy, Made in France, Made in the Southwest, and the historical fiction The Gondola Maker, joins me. And folks, we have a great half hour in store for you. First of all, Kalimera, nice to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
I wanna offer you some Greek, something sweet and a little demi-tasse, a coffee or something here.
That would be wonderful.
You know, around the world, customs are wonderful. In Greece, we would offer you something. Everybody who comes into the house, even if we don't have anything, a glass of water and a little something. It's a tradition, I think, that maybe perhaps here in America we've overlooked that. You know, we stand by the door, put our nose in between the door and say, "What do you want?"
Right, absolutely. Well, you know, the traditions of the old world have fascinated me for so long, and
Why?
you're absolutely right. And you know, the culinary traditions and those traditions of hospitality are closely linked and come from the same spirit as the handmade goods, whether we're talking about ceramics or leatherworking or making fine wine or cheese. It can stem from the same cultural roots, and I find that fascinating.
Why do you find it fascinating? What is it about tradition that not only plays a role, but what is it about it that attracts your passion to it?
Well, you know, when I first visited Venice as a 16-year-old, I had the great fortune to go there, and I had this image in my head that I was supposed to buy Murano glass and come home with Murano glass in my suitcase. But I had no idea why that was. I just had a notion.
Really?
And so...
Past lifetime.
You know, I found myself soon enough in the Piazza San Marco being lured to the island of Murano, which is famous for its glass-making tradition. I then stood in line behind several dozen Japanese and American tourists waiting at these glass factories to pay an absolutely exorbitant price for a little green glass fish, which
Sure.
I still have in my office on my windowsill.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was a little bit bewildered, as you can imagine, but being in Europe as a teenager, and especially as an American, where we're missing a lot of those very ancient and very centuries-old traditions, I was lured back to study art history. And so I spent a lot of years. I studied at Tufts University here in Boston. I studied at Yale and New Haven, and then got the opportunity to go overseas many times and really dig in deeper into these artisanal traditions. And, you know, as an art historian, you study Leonardo da Vinci and these, you know, great artists of the past. But many times these smaller artisanal traditions, which, by the way, are still very much alive, are overlooked. And so that is really my passion, really my niche, and what I wish to share with people.
Yeah. You know, when, for instance, I'm of Greek descent, I would rather go to the little monastery making the incense rather than the souvenir shop, even though I've never been.
Absolutely. Well, you know, when you travel in an unfamiliar environment, I think it can be intimidating because it's very difficult to tell the treasures from the trash. And, you know, I think what many people don't realize is that those souvenirs in the shops are very rarely made locally. So if you're buying a little statue of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, there's a 99% chance that it was actually made in China. So, and that's the truth. And it's the truth of, you know, quote-unquote Venetian masks that are imported from Asia these days.
Oh.
And when you're out of your element and you're in an unfamiliar environment, it's not clear how to tell those differences. What's authentic, what's not, what's locally made, how much should you pay?
Yeah.
How do you know if you're being
ripped off?
How do you know if you're in a tourist trap?
Yeah.
So my goal is to really lead travelers beyond the tourist traps and to find that cultural immersion through an appreciation of the art objects and more than that, the people who make them, who are still carrying on these living traditions.
Wow. I think Consumer Reports ought to interview you. Laura Morelli, my wonderful guest, who's going to be appearing at the Beauvoir Center for French Language Studies, organized by its revered director, Dr. Mel Yokin, and his wonderful wife, Cindy. They are proudly presenting their first program of the fall semester, and we want you to be aware that the distinguished and the very popular, the national celebrity art historian and lecturer, author Laura Morelli is going to present a talk on her award-winning book, Made in France. And that's all coming up, folks, this Monday, September 22nd, 4 p.m. I want you to circle it on your calendar. It's going to be held at the Grand Reading Room of the Claire T. Carney Library at our esteemed University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And when you present your talk this Monday, where do you normally begin? Is it something that you decide in the moment, or tell us a little bit about the presentation and the book itself?
Okay.
Yeah.
So my book, Made in France, covers all of the 22 regions of France, and it highlights the best of French artisanal tradition. And so in my talk on Monday, I'll be giving a whirlwind tour of some of those wonderful artisanal traditions, things like bronze from Paris, things like perfume and handmade quilts from Provence, things like olive oil soap, some of those lesser-known artisanal traditions, handmade knives, Limoges porcelain from central France, from the north, things like lace, and of course these arts of the table, which include not only things like cheese, but also things like crystal and pottery.
Still made by hand, and what I would imagine would be, a little shop, or by the folks whose grandparents did this and passed it down?
That's correct. And what's fascinating about Europe, and especially in France and Italy, is that these traditions are passed down from generation to generation. And I can give you so many examples of family enterprises that have been in business for literally hundreds of years, many generations. And as I go around the world and I talk with these traditional artisans, what they tell me is that it's so important for them to pass on that torch of tradition to the next generation. And so that's fascinating. And there are ways of learning, and when you go into these shops and you see them done, you understand how it takes years and decades to use the eye and the hand over and over and over, repeating the same gestures, the same techniques, and that's how these traditions are passed down through the centuries. In
their DNA, you might even say.
Absolutely.
And here, sadly, in America, that kind of passing of the torch, so to speak, from one generation to another is vanishing quickly. And, in my family, we had a diner, a little stainless steel diner, but the kids didn't want the restaurant business, so it was us, and that was the end of the tradition, so to speak.
Right.
But in Europe, they still value that tradition, which is wonderful.
It is, and it's fascinating that it can continue even after the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
But, this idea of passing on the torch of tradition is what was the inspiration for my historical novel, The Gondola Maker, because just as you say, I wondered what would happen if that son didn't want to carry on the tradition of his father. Yeah. And that story sort of germinated in my head.
So this is a historical novel?
Correct. Yes, The Gondola Maker is fiction, and it takes place in 16th century Venice. It tells the story of a gondola maker and his complicated relationship with his son. The son rejects his destiny as a master boat builder, but then is lured back to restore an antique gondola with the idea of taking a girl for a ride.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in, it is a personal pleasure to welcome Laura Morelli, who is not only a wonderful author and a guide for you to answer so many questions, and just a tremendous resource, but also a guest this coming Monday. Laura will present a talk on her award-winning book, one of her award-winning books, Made in France. She has others, but this will be primarily the focus, and I'm sure you're going to mention the others at the Claire T. Carney Library Grand Reading Room. This is Monday, September 22nd, 4 p.m. It's free, open to the public. Folks, we have such a tremendous resource with our university. Take advantage of it. We have a national celebrity. Take advantage of listening and let the words just enrich you. Not only about Laura's past and why she does what she does, but also because you are going to be edified as well. And who knows, you may just want to go to France or to Italy or to someplace around the world, right? Do you love travel, or is it the place that you love?
I do. I love the places more than I love going through the TSA security, truth be told.
Of course.
I love getting there.
Tell us about when you are, let's take France. What do you eat? What do you drink? Where do you sleep? Do you go along the back roads and seek out the locals and ask them where they and their families go?
I do. Yes, you summed it up. My last research trip to France, as I was planning, I first, at the top of my list, because I was a female traveling alone, I looked for inns that had fabulously reviewed restaurants, and it didn't matter to me if it was a 1-star hotel or a 4-star hotel. I wanted to eat well.
Yes.
And I really seek out the family-oriented, family-run places that are authentic, that are off the beaten path.
Yes.
And if you do go off the beaten path, that's where the artisans are. Now think about it. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, fire was a huge risk for a city, and so the so-called fire arts, the ceramic and glass, were hardly ever carried out within city walls. They were usually done in smaller towns or outside of the city. And so those traditions that have endured in these little hill towns and places outside of Paris, outside of Florence, outside of the major destinations where tourists go. So if you want to see those people still working, you need to go off the beaten path.
Yes, off the beaten path is right. I know we have some phone calls from folks who'd like to say hello, and in just a minute we will. But before we get to that, what about the ideas for your book? Let's stay with this one for the time being. Did the ideas come from these artisans, or how do those ideas evolve?
Well, my goal as an art historian is to equip and empower travelers to have those skills, to train their eye, so that, so my focus in researching and writing is to help people, know that, first of all, I got to go to the local museum and see what things looked like 500 years ago or 800 years ago, because you'll get an immediate education that is 100% visual.
Great point.
And before you go to the shops, it's a great idea to hit those museums so you really absorb the colors, the patterns, the styles that have been in place there in that specific location for a long time.
Right. Oh, see, I've learned two things in this short period of time: that the fire in the city posed a tremendous threat to burning the cities down, and get a footprint of where you are for more appreciation. Absolutely. Laura Morelli, our special guest this morning, the author of Made in Italy, Made in France, Made in the Southwest, and her historical fiction that is, I hear, rave reviews for the Gondola maker.
Thank you.
And you know what? It shows that you're a great storyteller. That's a tradition also, isn't it?
Well, I think, for me, of course, as an art historian, I love the objects, but what I really love are the people and the stories behind them, because that's really fascinating. And, you can't talk to somebody who was living in 1400, but you can talk to somebody still carrying on those traditions today.
How beautiful. How
and the stories
really,
are amazing. How
fortunate you are. And also, in that respect, that you have the passion to appreciate that, but also you are, in many respects, kind of like the facilitator of the time machine, where you go back and through your love and expertise, you can bring some of that information forward for us to appreciate. Well, folks, there goes my magnets on the refrigerator. I guess I'll have to start looking for some.
You need an upgrade.
I don't have to ship those back by a FedEx or anything. Yeah, the magnets will have to go. Speaking of shipping gifts, is it a good idea when you're mentioning Murano and glass and porcelain and knives and whatnot? Mm-hmm. With the way TSA is and travel and craziness is going on, do you recommend that folks maybe ship them back home?
Well, it depends on what you buy. If you can find a portable souvenir, for example, a small leather box with your initials gilded on the top, or a necklace, or a pair of boots, or something that you can, or a hat that you can easily bring on the plane, that is, of course, the easiest and the cheapest way to transport it home. There are certain things, however, that you won't be able to transport home very easily. Knives, of course, you won't be allowed to take on the plane at all. Something fragile like glass or porcelain you may want to ship. I usually advise people to stick with the major international carriers like FedEx, UPS, DHL, for the simple reason that if you send it through the local postal service, you won't have the ability to walk back down the street and file a claim if it's missing. So you want to stick with the major international carriers. It can be costly to ship, so you want to make sure it's something that you really love and really can't live without. Okay. Some merchants will be set up to ship things for you, and they even have sometimes special containers to pack goblets in, for example, or something in a particular shape.
Right.
So that's an option.
And in your book, Made in France, you're going to give the reader the gift, the luxury of pointing out certain artisans, certain places where they do get a good deal for their dollar. And I guess the first thing in any traveler's mind is, am I getting a fair deal here?
Right.
And
well, I give travelers a few questions to ask when they are contemplating a purchase overseas. One is it authentic? Another one is it locally made? Another one is, who made it? And if you know the answer to those three questions, and preferably if you're buying directly from the person who made it, you really won't have to worry too much about cost or being scammed, because number one, you're buying directly from the artisan. There will be no middleman. It'll be the best price that you will get in that local economy. And it's your best guarantee against a tourist trap or being
Yes.
scammed. But not only that, I mean, the value of buying directly from an artisan so far exceeds the monetary value that it's really about the cultural immersion and the experience and the interaction with an authentic artisan. That's where the value lays.
Before we go to our phone lines, if any of you have questions to ask of Laura Morelli, who you just recently heard on the nationally syndicated travel show with the Fromers. And we heard, we carry the show right here.
Great.
I want you folks to understand that we have a tremendous resource with Laura, who will be appearing at UMD. And this is courtesy of the revered director, Dr. Mel B. Yokin, his wonderful wife, Cindy, at the Beauvoir Center for French Language and Culture, organizing a wonderful fall program. And the distinguished author who is in our midst right now, Laura Morelli, will be giving a very interesting talk. Go by. I know that you'll be signing books. After your talk, you can get a chance to meet Laura, who is like a Greek goddess.
Well, let's not go that far.
You don't have to worry about eating on the little restaurants. You are perfect. And this is going to be held Monday, September 22nd, 4 o'clock, at the Claire T. Carney Library at the University of Massachusetts. Would you be kind enough to don those headphones so we can say hello to our callers? Can you hear okay?
I can hear fine.
Very good. Hello there, caller. Welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Phil, and good morning, Laura.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, let me preface everything by saying that I was born in the Azores.
Okay.
Okay, and one of the things that I was used to was having handmade stuff. Everything from ceramics to roofing tiles. Now, I'm sure that in Greece and in most of rural Europe, roofing tiles are used frequently. But unfortunately, they are all made in factories now, except for a very few people who are left who are still doing ceramics and or roof tiles or both. Mm-hmm. And the thing that, as a matter of fact, I saw a news report that on one of the islands in the Azores, there is one person left out of the whole population of the island that still makes ceramics. Everything else is made in factories.
Yeah. That's the way that the world is going. But you have a point here, and Laura, if a homemaker here in, let's say, Massachusetts wants to get imported tile or imported marble from Rome or something, do you guide them in that respect as well?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, you can import things for your home, for example, through certain organizations. I would direct people to some of the nonprofit organizations, of which there are many,
really?
Whose goal it is to connect local artisans who are still doing things in a handmade way, whether it's roof tiles or ceramics or baskets or whatever,
Linen, sure.
and connect them with an American market. A really great one is Aid to Artisans, which is based in Hartford, Connecticut. There are many, many other small nonprofits who are doing really good work in matching artisans in very specific places with the American market. And so that's where I would start versus a commercial importer, because the nonprofits are going to be more focused on sustaining those handmade traditions.
What's the website one more time?
Aid to Artisans is the organization in Hartford.
Now, folks, go to your website, www.lauramorelli.com, and it's spelled Morelli.com. They don't get any Italian cheese, but will they? Will you have have information on how to connect to these nonprofits?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And if you go to my website, you can download a free guide that I have there that's called How to Go Shopping on Vacation Without Being Ripped Off.
Oh,
and there are 5 questions there that you should ask yourself before you make a purchase overseas. And if you follow those questions, you'll be in really good shape.
Jay, is there anything else you'd like to ask of Laura?
Very interesting interview.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
Bye.
You too.
With the other books that you have authored, Made in Italy, Made in France, that you'll talk about Monday, Made in the Southwest, I pick up from your accent that you're not from Bangor.
No, but I'm not from Texas either, believe it or not. Many people in New England tag me for a Texan, but I'm from the coast of Georgia originally.
Are you? I picked up just a touch. Whereabouts?
St. Simon's Island.
Oh my goodness! Just a
little known gem, but
national habitat.
I try to keep it that way, but
yes, I know, but a lot of preservation has been going on there, especially for the wildlife and whatnot. Just tremendous work.
It's a beautiful place.
And a book signing is going to be following the lecture that's free and open to the public. If you'd like to go by and meet Laura Morelli, who holds a Ph.D. from Yale, where she was a Bass Writing Fellow. She has taught art history at several universities. She is always, featured for her expertise on so many of the national shows, from CNN to Fromer's travel show, Travel Today, USA Today. Who is one of the most interesting people you have ever met in the world?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I'll say one of the most interesting families that I've ever met in the world was a family in Deruta, which is a little hill town in Umbria in central Italy. Uh-huh. And when I did my research for this, it's a big center for ceramics. And when I did my research, I noticed that there were 2 ceramic studios next door to one another with the same name, but they were not the same business. So there's a story for you, right?
Yes.
So I made a beeline to these two shops to talk to these families and find out, why it is that they had 2 shops with the same name.
Right.
And, it was one of those stories that you could just imagine that, as far back as the Renaissance,
sure,
they were originally one family, and then at a certain generation, there was a difference of opinion, they formed 2 completely separate enterprises and continued along these artisanal lines and passing down these traditions to the next generation, and even remained next door to one another.
The Hatfield and McCoys.
They were the Hatfield and McCoys of central Italy.
How fascinating. We have 1 minute, and in that minute, I want you to remove yourself from all the wonderful things that you've experienced in your life, and tell me what your traveling, what your interaction with other people has taught you personally about life in general.
I think one thing I've learned is that people are basically generous and they want to share their passion. Mm-hmm. And I have never been turned away from someone. I've never come across an artisan who said, well, I'm not going to share my secret with you or anything like that. People are 100% open and generous with sharing what they're excited about, and I think that's a basic human need.
And perhaps they're just reflecting what they see in you. Laura Morelli, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.